Hi, this is Marlene Dinarius here from latinum.org.uk, and in this video I'm continuing on my explorations in Thoroughbass, Continuo, figured bass, whatever you want to call it. And the way I'm approaching this is by looking at many different textbooks written in the 18th century for beginners, because what I've noticed is that these textbooks all offer something different and approach the topic from a different angle. So there's much to be learned by going through the different textbooks, not just looking at one. This is Miller's Elements of Thoroughbass and Composition, in which the rules of accompaniment for the harpsichord or pianoforte, the text actually just talks about the harpsichord, so this is the main focus, but it makes no difference really what keyboard you are playing. Are rendered amusing by the introduction of 8 Italian, 8 French and 12 English songs collected from the works of eminent composers, ancient and modern, with proper lessons for practice, written by way of conversation between the master and his pupil, for the use of such performers as are unacquainted with the principles of harmony. Most humbly dedicated to the Right Honourable Lord Viscount Galway, Knight of the Bath. By Edward Miller, Doctor of Music, Opera Quinta. Price £1 and 1 shilling, so it wasn't a cheap book. London, printed and sold by Longman and Broderick, number 26 Cheapside, that's in the City of London, number 13 Haymarket, ditto, and by the author at Doncaster. Chapter 1, Article the First, on the intervals. So this goes through a conversation between the pupil and the master. So what is Thoroughbass? Good question. The master then says, in brief, Thoroughbass is the art of accompanying the voice or instruments by means of proper chords. And there's a little star there, an asterisk, telling us that there's a note, which we will come to later. What is a chord? A chord is the combination of 3 or more different notes being struck all together on the keys of the harpsichord with the right hand. How are chords expressed? Generally by figures placed over or under the bass notes. What do you mean by an interval? The distance from one note to another. Thus, from C to D is the interval of a second. From C to E, a third. From C to F, a fourth. From C to G, a fifth. From C to A sixth. From C to B, a seventh. And from C to C, an eighth or octave. Pupil, give me an example in notes of the different intervals. So unison, both the same note here. Example of the different intervals, unison. Second. Third. Fourth. fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth. What is the meaning of the figure 1, as you'll see there in the top right of the notation on the staff, put over the interval of the 8, and the figure 2 put over that of the 9th? To show you that if you want to play any interval higher than the octave, here's the octave, instead of calling that note 8, you will then call it 1, in regard to any notes you may want above the octave. Thus, the 9th D will be a second, and E would be a third. And now we've come to the asterisk, which we saw before. Notwithstanding, says Dr. Miller, this definition of thorough bass is sufficient for mere accompaniment, yet its use is far more extensive, as it comprehends all the rules of composition relative to harmony. As to melody or the arrangement of single sounds, it is rather the business of the imagination than of judgment. The rules of harmony and modulation contained in this book are indispensable to form a composer, and they may as properly be called the elements or groundwork of composition as of thorough bass. After the student well understands these rules, a close examination of the works of eminent composers will supply every deficiency. Page 2. The pupil. What method am I to take to find out the different intervals on the harpsichord? The master says, always to count from the bass note the long keys upwards. That is, from the left hand to the right, calling the bass note 1. Is there no exception to this rule? Yes. For the interval of the 7th, it is easier to suppose it one note or key below the octave, or 8th. Thus, for all the other intervals, you must always count the long keys upwards, either from the bass note, or if that be very distant, for example an octave below or 2 octaves below, calling that octave 1 in regard to such notes as you may want above it. So here's our C, here's a C 1 octave below, it's still 1. I think, says the pupil, I shall find some difficulty to remember the intervals to any given bass note. And the master tactfully says it may be so, for which reason I will give you an example in notes for you to get by heart, and you must observe at the same time what lines and spaces the different intervals contain. So here are some examples of intervals. Seconds. 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 Thirds. thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, so those are some examples of intervals. And the next thing that Miller says, what is the interval from C to D? And the pupil responds, a second. From C to E, a third. And so on for the rest. And here's the most important part of this chapter. The master says, very well. But you must make yourself perfectly master of the different intervals before you proceed any further. In other words, spend a lot of time messing around on your keyboard, making all kinds of intervals. Here, thirds, fourths, and so on, and just go and spend a lot of time until you can sort of do these with your eyes shut, so that if you play any note, you can know where the interval is for that note without having to count or think about it. So this is what it means to be perfectly master of the different intervals before you proceed any further. So just have a great game, play around on your keyboard. You may actually be quite advanced at playing and still not be very good at doing this, especially as you get to sixths and sevenths. Thirds and fourths and fifths are dead easy. It gets a bit more tricky with the bigger intervals. So that's the end of chapter 2 from Miller of Explorations in Thoroughbass, Basso, Continuo, Figured Bass. And you can find my work at Patreon if you're interested in supporting what I do. Bye.